We can go back now to Liverpool. Jeremy Corbyn just coming on stage to make his address to the Royal College of Nursing.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to the conference. I feel very honoured to have been invited and very, very pleased to be here today, because I want to thank you and everyone in the nursing profession and in our National Health Service for all the work that you do and the way that you often get criticised, but in fact people work in the National Health Service because they love their work, they love the profession, and they basically do it because they want us all to be healthy. So thank you all very much indeed for everything you do. And our politicians owe you a great duty, a duty to ensure that you can work with dignity and that you are not held back from providing the best possible standard of service to all of your patients, because I do understand the stress that so many of you go through every day. I talk frequently to local GPs in my own area as well as nurses in my local hospital, and I have worked in the past in the trade unions in the National Health Service. And so I want to outline to you today what Labour wants to offer to you in the general election. We are ready to step in and save the NHS from the cuts and privatisation that have happened over the past 7 years. Every day I ensure that our general election team is fully aware of the importance of the National Health Service. At our headquarters in London, the walls are decorated with original posters from the 1940s saying Labour's health service covers everyone, and the Tories voted against it. Nothing embodies our campaign theme, for the many, not the few, better than the National Health Service. Universal lifelong health care, free at the point of need. However, our health service is actually being dismantled by stealth. Over the past 7 years, our National Health Service has been driven into crisis after crisis. A&E departments struggling to cope, waiting lists soaring, and we saw last week the Tory cuts have exposed patient services to cyber attack. I want to pay a huge tribute to all the NHS staff and the way they've responded to this terrible cyber attack. The stress you must have faced trying to keep patients safe must have been intense, and still is. This is just another example of the extraordinary lengths all of you go to every day to keep our country healthy. I was talking to junior doctors and nurses at the James Paget Hospital in Great Yarmouth on Saturday. Like many, all its operations had been cancelled because of the cyber attack. Frankly, the cyber attack is highway robbery against all of us. We have to have investment in our NHS to protect all the systems so we're not held to ransom by criminals who are doing us all damage and doing us all down. You stepped up to try to protect our patients. Thank you very much for what you did. Our NHS is under threat from privatisation, which was brought in by the Health and Social Care Act. The privatisation has gone on a huge scale. £13 billion of taxpayers' money handed over the last year to private companies to profit from our NHS services. And Aaron Bevan once said of the National Health Service, "It will only last as long as there are folk with faith left to fight for it." I say to everyone, remember those words, those prescient words of Nye Bevan. And in all my life, I've been involved in campaigns to support and defend the National Health Service. And I know that every hospital has friends. Every GP surgery has friends. There are millions of people in this country who are utterly determined to defend the principle of a National Health Service, free at the point of use for everybody in our society. We're here in Nye's legacy. And in hospitals, health centres and communities all across the land, there are many people who are listening very carefully to this election and thinking very carefully about their future. People for whom working in the NHS is a privilege and a pleasure. Like so many in public service everywhere, people work in it and believe in the principles of the NHS, a service like no other. Not a service which checks your bank balance before it checks your blood pressure. I'm always astonished when I talk to people from the United States. We talk to each other in a normal way about each other's health. That's a normal conversation. Many in the United States talk about the quality of the private health insurance they've got. They lack what we have, which is one of the most civilized things about our country. That is our National Health Service. We are utterly determined to defend it. I wanted to say something about the state of nursing, because Britain is not being run for the many, it's not being run for the majority, and across our country I believe people are being held back. If you're a student nurse without a bursary, doing a second job to make ends meet, you're being held back. If you worry about your children because they can't get together a deposit for a home or afford the deposit to rent a private place, then you're being held back. If you manage a ward in a hospital and you can't free up beds because of the cuts in social care, then you have a problem. The government is holding you back, stopping you from doing properly the job you were trained and proud to do. We are the 6th richest country in the world. It cannot be right that we have these problems. It cannot be right that trained nurses are leaving the profession for other jobs. It cannot be right that tax giveaways for the very rich and big business have been put in front of the needs of funding our National Health Service, social care and proper treatment for all NHS staff. The RCN, your union, has found that nursing shortages have doubled in the past 4 years. We could have 40,000 fewer nurses than we need by 2026. Your pay has fallen 14% in real terms since 2010, and you don't work any fewer hours for it. That is the record that the government has left us. I wish there could be a public debate on this record with Theresa May, but she seems reluctant to have that public discussion. Last week, a doctor from Leeds called Romana told her she was considering quitting the NHS after 12 years of service because of crippling frontline staff shortages, which have worsened as a result of government's failure to properly invest in the NHS. She asked why Jeremy Hunt had been reappointed since he'd demoralised the entire workforce. There is apparently no answer to that question. You have to ask Jeremy Hunt when he makes himself available to answer questions. Which I'm sure is only it's only a matter of time, and I'm sure he's going to be pitching up any time soon. But we do need a government that recognises the truth of what's happened and what is the real scale of the crisis. Because if you're a Prime Minister that is a party that once called itself the Nasty Party, you have to wonder about their attitude towards the National Health Service. And then pretend you support working people and the National Health Service. Come on, we're not fools. We need a government that will stand up for the hundreds of thousands of workers in this country who are not being paid the minimum wage, the 6 million who get less than the living wage, the 0 hours contracts and employment agency malpractices. We need decent working conditions for everybody in our society. Because if you charge people tribunal fees, you can't go to get justice in the workplace. I think we need a different approach to employment as a whole. and therefore the Labour Party is putting forward a very different agenda of workers' rights and employment rights, proper funding of public services in this election. Can you imagine what the NHS would be like in 5 years' time if we carried on with this underfunding, carried on with this level of demoralisation in the workforce? It would be unrecognisable as a National Health Service. In name, cut back, broken up and plundered by private corporations. I want to make it very, very clear. We, the Labour Party, are very determined to put the NHS back on its feet, to move towards a national social care service, to give everyone the care and dignity they deserve, and make an utter reality of the parity of esteem between mental and physical health a reality. I feel very passionately about the NHS, but I also feel very passionately about mental health services and social care services. We have 1 million people, often very, very vulnerable people, not getting the social care they need. Many, often women, give up jobs in order to care for elderly relatives because the service isn't there to do it for them. And our mental health service, where 6,000 mental health nurses have lost their jobs in the past 7 years, is under enormous strain. There's a mental health crisis in this country. 1 in 4 of us will have some kind of crisis during our lifetime. It's not much help if you're told to wait 6 months before you get any effective therapy for that crisis. I pay tribute to and thank all those that work within our mental health services, but I'm utterly determined that parity of esteem will be a reality, and there will be a properly funded mental health service all over this country in the future. And today we're making it very clear that we're pledging an extra £7.4 billion a year for the National Health Service throughout the next Parliament, including £2 billion annually to modernise buildings and IT systems. This funding settlement will allow us to guarantee access to treatment within 18 weeks, cutting 1 million from the NHS waiting lists by the end of that Parliament. Ensure that those needing accident and emergency services are seen within 4 hours, helping another 1 million people each year. Delivering the cancer care strategy for England in full by 2020. That will help 2.5 million people who are living with cancer. Create a new £500 million winter pressures fund to protect patients from the problems that we saw earlier this year. This is our new deal for NHS patients. It will give NHS staff the support they need and deserve to give the best possible service to patients, and will guarantee that level of service. We will ensure the standards that the Conservatives have failed to deliver and which patients are legally entitled to are met in the future. But we also recognise that great services depend on retaining staff by rewarding them properly. Everyone in the NHS goes above and beyond every day what they have to do. Your ballot result yesterday showed how angry and frustrated your members are after a 14% cut in real pay over the past 7 years. We will not put you in that position. We will lift the public sector pay cap and hand back decisions on pay to an independent review body. We want nurses to be paid a decent wage. And, very importantly, we'll fund training and restore the bursaries for nurses, the vital funding the Tories chose at an end. Last week I was in Worcester talking to student nurses, those that had access to the student nurse bursary, and they were telling me they'd come into nursing after doing other jobs and other career paths, and they decided nursing was their calling and had come into it. And they told me how much they enjoyed it, how much they were looking forward to working in hospitals, surgeries, in the community, mental health, all the different aspects and skills that you all have. And they told me how proud they were of it. And I asked all of them, I said, if you didn't have a nurse bursary, would you be doing this? And they said, it would only be possible if you had a partner who earned enough to be able to fund you through the training to become a nurse. It is utterly short-sighted and counterproductive and totally unfair on the student nurses of tomorrow, on the nursing profession of tomorrow, and of the community of today. I'm utterly determined we'll bring back the nurse bursary so there isn't a nurse staff crisis in 5 years, 10 years and 15 years' time. Let's invest for the future. This election will define the future of the National Health Service as almost no other has. Labour founded the National Health Service. We believe passionately and very strongly in the National Health Service and want to restore it to good health. It's central to our ideas of transforming Britain, to create a fairer society for the many, not the few. Tomorrow we'll set out our policies in full in our manifesto. You may think you've read it already, but the real one, the marked copy, will come out tomorrow morning, and you'll see it then. And I'm very proud of the work that's gone into that manifesto. I'm very proud of the help and support we've been given and advice we've been given by people well beyond the Labour Party who've advised us on content to it and aspects of policy that we'll be producing tomorrow. Because the scale of our ambition will be very clear. The manifesto will be inclusive of all aspects of our society, it will be fair to all aspects of our society, and it will be fully costed. Every last line of it will be fully costed. Because we want to transform this country together. You do things better together, transform it together for a better society. Only a few weeks remain for that message to get across, to show you how we want to hand power back to the people of this country, so everyone in this country has a real stake in the future. A future, a Britain for the many, not the few. I want to conclude my speech by saying this. Those that work in the NHS represent all that's good in our country and our society. Our NHS represents that collective endeavour to ensure that we're all able to cope with illnesses and cope with stress. But there are also aspects of inequality within our society which the NHS has to cope with. Shorter life expectancy in the poorest parts of our country. Those that become addicted to many substances because of the misery of the lives they lead. Those that live in poor quality housing, likely to get ill. Those that go through enormous stress, likely to suffer mental health conditions. The NHS is great and it's wonderful, but we also need to reform other aspects of our society so that we all lead healthier, richer lives. I'm very honoured to be invited here today. I'm very grateful to all of you for the work you do in keeping us healthy. And I want to work with all of you in the future to improve the health, the happiness, the self-esteem and the opportunities for everybody in our society. Thank you very much for inviting me today.
So the Labour leader getting enthusiastic reception from the Royal College of Nursing there, indeed many joining in a standing ovation, not surprising really. He promised extra spending for the NHS.
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.